Excellent. Moving right along, we are at the fifth lesson within the TExES core subject test prep course inside competency number 10. This descriptive statement reads, "The beginning teacher knows how to determine students' independent, instructional, and frustration reading levels and uses the information to select appropriate materials for individual students and to guide students' selection of independent reading materials in grades 4 through 6. In this section, you will learn how to determine students' independent, instructional, and frustration reading levels. Teachers determine students' reading levels using informal reading inventories, word recognition lists, and graded reading passages, where an informal reading inventory is a running collection of assessments that acts as a portfolio of reading achievement for each individual student in order to indicate that student's reading level. The important note about informal reading inventories is that each student will have a unique portfolio of assessments based on their own reading skill and ability. The next type of assessment used to determine students' reading levels is called a word recognition list, which provides the teacher with the child's sight word vocabulary knowledge and ability to decode words based on their sound to symbol relationship. Graded reading passages are also called a running record, where the teacher chooses a passage and the student reads it aloud. During this time, the teacher is listening as the child reads aloud, and the teacher keeps a detailed record of the student's performance, marking errors and looking for patterns of mistake. Now, let's go over a few key terms you can expect to see on your exam. Miscue analysis is the process of analyzing a student's oral reading to help identify the student's areas of strengths and needs so that the teacher can provide data based on instruction, knowing which skills are most important for that student to work on. For example, this student demonstrated difficulty differentiating simple present and simple past tense. Now let's have a look at graphophonemic errors. This is an error caused by a child reading slowly and on a word-by-word basis, which tells us that the student is relying too heavily on looking at the phonics to try to decode the word. The most common culprit for this case would be that the text that the student is reading is too challenging. In the next term related to this topic is semantic errors. This is a meaning-related error, such as when a student reads cat for pet. Here, the writing is unrelated, but the meaning is related. In this case, it would mean that the student is using her correct comprehension of the story, but isn't using her phonics skills enough. The last term we'll cover here is called syntactic errors, which is the order or sequence of the language written or spoken. Reading errors in syntax might include, for example, reading apple my instead of my apple. In order to determine if a reading passage is too easy, too difficult, or just right, the teacher will ask the student comprehension checking questions based on the story read during the running record assessment. These questions are supplied to the teacher for each story. The answers that the student gives will provide insight that helps the teacher determine if this text passage is the correct level for this student. Let's define the 3 different reading levels now. Books at a student's independent reading level can be read and understood without the help of the teacher. A student's independent reading level is reached when the student reads a passage aloud with 95% or more words read correctly and answers 90% or more of the comprehension questions correctly. Next is instructional reading level, and this is the level of material that the student can listen to and understand and also read with direct support from the teacher. This level is lower than the independent reading level, and it's the level that content area texts, such as science and social studies, will be at for the student. The instructional reading level is reached when a student correctly reads aloud 90% or more of the words and answers at least 60% of the comprehension questions correctly. A student's frustration reading level is reached when fluency and comprehension are lost, even with the help from the teacher. The frustration reading level is defined when a student cannot correctly read aloud at least 90% of the words or answer at least 60% of the comprehension checking questions correctly. Quick to note, a teacher needs these two things to accurately determine a student's instructional and independent reading level. Number one, the percentage of words that the child can correctly read aloud. And number two, the percentage of comprehension questions the child correctly answers. Selecting the right reading material for students based on their reading levels can significantly enhance their reading experience. The following guidelines will assist you in helping grades 4 through 6 students choose appropriate independent reading materials based on their own individual reading proficiency. Teachers need to find ways to motivate students to love to read. For your exam, keep the following ways in mind to engage students in reading. Enable students' reading skills, create a stimulating environment, provide appropriate reading materials, read aloud to students, engage parents and guardians to read aloud to their children, and provide books at home. Our instructional lessons need to be strategic and systematic, but they also need to be positive and upbeat. Next, teachers should have the classroom library stocked and organized. Hang student work on the wall and make sure that students are able to find learning supplies easily. Happiness is contagious, and modeling happy learning and polite behavior creates a positive and empathetic learning environment. This sounds obvious, and hopefully it is, but teachers must provide students with appropriately leveled reading books that hold the interest of their students. Teachers should also make it a habit to read aloud to the students every single day. Another strategy for engaging and motivating students to read is by encouraging parents or guardians to read to their children and to model the value of reading at home for pleasure and for information. In this next section, you will learn the strategies for promoting purposeful, independent reading. Remember, independent reading happens when the student is doing the reading and that it is not part of the teacher's instruction. More often than not, students will read fiction, but students can read expository text such as newspaper articles, recipes, and many other types of texts that independent reading could facilitate. To build off this last point, it is the job of the teacher to guide students toward books that will promote the student's independent reading level while growing a love for reading. Independent reading promotes understanding and awareness for linguistic patterns, builds their reading fluency, background knowledge, and vocabulary, as well as confidence as a reader. In order to promote students' independent reading, teachers need to follow 4 key focus points. The first, we need to teach students how to select books at appropriate reading levels. The strategy we use for students under 2nd grade is called the Goldilocks rule. This is where the students find a book that looks fun and interesting to them, and they try to read it. After a couple of pages, they ask themselves, is this book too easy, too difficult, or just right? For students at 2nd grade or older, they can use the 5-finger test. This is where the student finds a book that they think looks fun and interesting. Next, the student opens a page in the middle of the book. The student reads this page and puts a finger up every time they come across a word that they don't know the meaning of or they can't pronounce. After the student finishes one page, they should do this same test with one other random page in the book. After each page, if the student has 0 or 1 finger up, meaning they knew all or all except for one word, that book is too easy for them. If the student has 4 or 5 fingers up, meaning they didn't know 4 or 5 words, that book is too challenging, it's too difficult for them. And if the student has 2 or 3 fingers up, that book is just right. That being said, if the student is highly motivated about the topic of the book and they have 4 fingers up, it still might be acceptable because that student is going to enjoy the topic of that book. Next, teachers use what's called an interest inventory, which is a survey used to get to know your students better and discover students' personal interests in order to find books that they will enjoy. Finding books on topics that students enjoy is a great way to motivate students to read even more. While taking your exam, be on the lookout for the I+I strategy. Let's go over this now. The I+I strategy stands for independent reading level of the student and the student's interest to find a winning combination for a just right reading independent book. This is a great way to help students motivate to read more and more. The next strategy for promoting independent reading for students is to have structured independent reading opportunities inside the classroom. During this time, everyone in the classroom is reading silently and independently. The silent reading time should be done at the same time each day. The teacher should increase the length of time as the year goes on. The next strategy to promote independent reading is to help get students reading at home. As teachers, we can do this by creating a defined system where the teacher makes sure that the student leaves the classroom with a book and a reading log. The parent or guardian provides a safe, quiet space for the student to read. This student's job is to read, return the book back to school, and bring the parent or guardian's signature back from the reading log. Teachers can also promote at-home reading by allowing students to take home books from their classroom library. Teachers can also provide students and their parents or guardians with a list of appropriate books for the family to check out at the local library. For our English learners, teachers can help overcome the language barrier to promote independent reading at home and maintain healthy communication by providing written instructions using the parent's preferred language. Using independent silent reading and fluency has some limitations. Number one, limitation of using independent silent reading to increase fluency. Number two, how to make independent silent reading more effective to support fluent development. Let's go over this now. Although practicing reading is excellent for students, the major problem with independent silent reading is knowing whether or not a student is actually doing the reading, if they're actually reading it fluently, and if they're actually comprehending that which they read. Teachers need to find ways to make independent silent reading effective to support fluency development. In order to do this, teachers provide students with the appropriate leveled books, and we need to make sure that our students are accountable for what they're reading. Strategies include using a reading log, book report, presentation, and having individual conferences to meet and discuss the books that the students are reading. Need to pass your TExES core subjects exam? Click the link in the description below to get prepared faster, smarter, better, with everything you need all in one place. So you ace your exam and become a certified teacher with teacherpreps.com.